A trained dog did not waste a warning on the wrong thing. The zipper on the body bag rasped upward with a dry, icy sound, its teeth catching once on black plastic before the morgue technician tugged harder. 7 seconds, maybe less, and the man on table 3 would become paperwork, a label, a sealed mistake moving under fluorescent light. Greer Kincaid watched Pike sit hard beside the gurney wheel. His amber eyes locked onto the left front wheel with the focus of a biological sensor, every line of his lean body aimed at the rubber groove instead of the face inside the bag. The Belgian Malinois held his torn right ear forward, body still enough to look carved from bad news. He stayed silent. He stayed planted. He refused the room's routine, and from Pike, that meant something had already gone wrong. The morgue smelled of bleach, cold steel, wet rubber, and a thin thread of diesel that did not belong under a hospital. Greer's index finger tapped once against her thigh. 1 count. Then none. The technician glanced at the dog, annoyed in the tired way people got annoyed when routine hit a bump. "Can you move him?" he asked. Greer studied the wheel groove. Gray grit clung there, damp and granular, salt dark, ground into the rubber as if the harbor had followed the dead man inside. The bag had come from a port rescue transfer 20 minutes earlier, tagged as cold water recovery, no pulse in transit, no viable airway, no family yet. All very neat. Neat was how people killed patients without meaning to. Greer stepped closer as the zipper climbed another inch. Pike shifted his nose down toward the wheel, where the grit had packed into the seam with the stubbornness of something carried too far. His shoulders stayed tight. His mouth stayed closed. The morgue unit hummed behind them, steady and smug, turning death into a piece of building maintenance. Greer hated that sound. It made the end feel organized. The technician said, "Doctor, he's already cleared." He sounded neither rude nor cruel, just trapped inside the kind of sentence that let a room stop thinking. Greer ignored him and bent over the bag. Rainwater beaded on the black plastic and ran in thin lines toward the zipper. The patient's metal tag had slid free near the opening, pressed against the waxy hollow of his throat. For half a second, the steel stayed flat and dead. Then a pale fog touched it, small, almost nothing. A breath so weak it could have passed for a trick of the lights, except tricks did not bloom from the mouth of a patient and fade before a person could blink. Greer caught the zipper with 2 fingers. Dead men don't fog steel. The technician froze with his hand still on the pull tab. Greer shoved the plastic down, hard enough to crack the stiffness where cold had made it stubborn. The man inside was pale, his appearance showing signs of severe exposure, lashes clumped with salt. His chest barely moved, and even that looked like wishful thinking. That was the trap. Cold could hide life down where lazy hands stopped looking. She pressed 2 fingers high at his neck, then deeper, patient, letting the pad of her glove settle past the slick chill of skin. Nothing came back at first. The technician started to say her name. Greer raised one hand without looking. Pike's nails clicked once on the tile, then stopped. There, a thread under her fingers. Not a pulse anyone would brag about, not even a promise. More like a tap from behind a wall. Greer leaned close and felt the faintest warmth against the inside of her wrist. Her voice dropped flat. "He's not dead. Move!" The room did not explode into panic. It snapped into purpose. The technician backed off, suddenly awake. Greer stripped the tag aside, checked the jaw, the cold stiffness, the shallow pull at the throat. Alive was not safe. Alive was a problem with a clock on it. The gurney wheels squealed when they broke table 3 loose, a high metal cry that cut through the morgue's mechanical hum. Pike moved only when Greer gave the low hand sign, and even then he stayed tight to the left front wheel, head lowered, nose still reading what the room refused to see. "Trauma bay," Greer said. "Warm blankets now. Call Silva. Tell them hypothermic trauma, weak carotid, possible drowning exposure, and nobody signs out transfer gear." The technician reached for the wheel brake out of habit. Pike's head snapped toward his hand, silent, planted, all discipline and warning. The man stopped because the dog's silence scared him more than a growl would have. Good. Civilization had stumbled into one useful instinct. Greer crouched and looked at the wheel groove again. The gray grit was mixed with something darker, a thin smear tucked inside the rubber channel. Harbor dirt? Maybe. Maybe not. She did not touch it yet. Nobody touches that wheel. The phone on the morgue desk rang as the gurney rolled toward the door. 1 ring. 2. The technician grabbed it, face pale now, and listened. His eyes moved from Greer to the bag and then to the wheel. He covered the receiver with his palm. They're asking if the transfer equipment has been released. Greer kept one hand on the gurney rail and one eye on Pike. The man in the bag gave another shallow, stolen breath. Nobody on the phone asked about him. The trauma bay hit them like a different season. Heat rolled out under the white lights, thick with coffee breath, alcohol wipe, warmed plastic, and the sharp, wet smell of a body dragged out of cold water before death had finished its paperwork. Jude Rafferty came through the doors on the gurney, with the black bag folded open under him, his skin the color of old candle wax. The monitor found him late and complained in fast, uneven beeps. Greer did not look relieved. Relief was for later, if later earned it. She cut the wet shirt from his chest with trauma shears, and the blades made a harsh, rhythmic sound through soaked fabric that clung to Jude like cold skin. She moved slow enough not to drag cloth across hidden wounds, fast enough to beat the cold, still sitting inside him. Water ran off the fabric and slapped the tile. The room was hot enough to make sweat gather at Greer's collar, but Jude carried the morgue with him. His body threw off no heat. Pike stopped at the threshold without being told. Front paws just outside the red line. He watched the gurney, not Jude's face. That mattered. Greer clocked it and kept moving. He's not a miracle. He's a patient, a nurse. Shoved warm blankets in. End quote. End quote. Someone called out pressure. Someone else fought with a blood tubing package that refused to open. Normal little disasters. Greer liked those. Normal disasters could be handled. Jude's pupils wandered under half lids, neither tracking nor fully gone. Greer checked airway, jaw, breath, the tiny chest movement that kept trying to disappear. The cold had made him look peaceful in the worst possible way. Peaceful got people zipped up. She hated peaceful. The shears cut again through sleeve seam and collar, wet cloth parting with sticky resistance. She peeled more fabric away, found bruising along the ribs, an abrasion at the shoulder, and salt crystals caught in the hair at his temple. Then the shears snagged on something that should not have been inside his clothing. Greer paused. A controlled pause, not a freeze. There was a difference. She worked 2 fingers under the cloth and drew out a short length of red strap, wet and twisted. The edge frayed as if it had been torn free under load. Too clean in color. Too new beside the rest of the ruined gear. Pike's head lowered. His nose shifted toward the strap, then past it, back to the gurney frame. He sat hard again. Same silence. Same awful certainty. Greer set the strap on a sterile towel instead of tossing it into the mess pile. "Bag it separate," she said. The nurse looked once at Pike and did not argue. Smart woman. The monitor beeped faster, then stumbled. Jude's fingers twitched against the rail, weak as rain. Dr. Camille Silva came in tying her mask, eyes already on the numbers, before she reached the bed. She had that useful kind of calm that did not need applause. Greer gave her the version that mattered. Cold water trauma, weak pulse found in morgue, airway shallow, pressure soft, possible bleed, unknown contamination on transfer gear. Silva nodded, already gloved. No drama, no lecture. Bless her for that. In a world otherwise committed to wasting oxygen. Greer pulled her phone with her clean hand, opened the old emergency contact buried under a name she had not used in years, Vance Gage Cutler, EODK 9. The photo went first, gray grit packed in the wheel groove, Then the red strap on the towel. Then Pike at the threshold, sitting like a bad verdict. She added 3 words: port transfer gear. The message sent with a tiny sound that felt too polite for the room. Jude's mouth moved. Nothing came out. Greer bent closer, because fragments mattered when bodies could not afford speeches. His breath smelled like salt and old fuel. His lips shaped one word, lost it, found it again, then ground the phrase out through salt water and teeth. Wrong. Hoist. Exactly that. 2 words dragged up from somewhere cold and dark. Silva's eyes flicked to Greer, then to the red strap, then back to the patient. She did not ask the stupid question. Greer respected her more. For every second she stayed quiet. Silva takes him. Nobody moves the gurney. Nobody releases the bag. Silva put one hand on the rail. I've got him. That was all. Enough. Greer stepped back, and the heat of the trauma bay suddenly felt wrong against her scrubs, like the room was trying to sweat the morgue off her skin. Pike rose, but did not cross the threshold until she signaled. Even then, he carried himself tight and controlled. She checked his paws with one glance out of habit. Good pads. Dry enough. For now. Her phone buzzed before she could pocket it. Gage had replied with no greeting, no question about how her night was going. Good man. If the dog sat, don't release anything. Then a second message landed. Who asked for the gear? Down the hall, a security radio crackled. A voice reported 3 people at the loading dock with transfer paperwork, saying they had authorization to retrieve the equipment immediately. Greer looked at Pike. Pike looked toward the corridor, past the blood, past the patient, toward the wheels. Rain came sideways through the loading dock door, hard and cold enough to make the overhead lights look sick. The van sat crooked, under the awning, with its headlights burning straight into the bay, turning puddles into white knives. 3 people in dark delivery jackets stood just inside the yellow safety line, their posture too settled for lost contractors. The clipboard was worse. People who belonged in hospitals hated clipboards at 3 in the morning. These 3 held theirs like a warrant. Greer came in with Pike tight at her left knee, and the morgue gurney behind her, its left front wheel still holding that packed gray grit from the harbor. Hospital security had one hand up, trying to sound official and missing by inches. A technician from transport hovered too close to an oxygen rack, because naturally, the universe had decided to put pressurized oxygen exactly where idiots might start swinging. Greer took all of it in before she spoke. Hands first, boots significant. Van door open, driver still behind the wheel. A narrow gap by the fire door. Pike saw it too. His head lowered, quiet as a threat with fur. The woman with the clipboard stepped forward. Her badge was laminated, cheap, wet at the edges. We're here for the transfer equipment. No name, no patient. No question about Jude Rafferty being alive or dead or inconveniently breathing in a room full of expensive machines. Just the gear. She pushed the paper toward security. Greer took it before the guard could. The date was right. The hospital code was close. The pickup timestamp was not. It had the equipment released 12 minutes before the morgue call had come in. Cute. Not smart, but cute. Wrong time, Greer said. The woman's face changed by half a muscle. Greer liked honest faces better. Honest fear, honest anger, honest stupidity. This was logistics pressure wearing a human suit. A man behind the woman shifted his weight toward the gurney. Pike moved with him, blocking the angle instead of the body. The man stopped. The van engine coughed outside. Greer's phone buzzed in her pocket. Then the speaker made a sharp electric sound where she had left Gage on the line. If Pike sat down, I'm already unhappy. Greer didn't look at the phone. You should be. The man in back said, release the equipment. Flat voice, work voice. Like he was asking for a pallet of linens instead of the thing that had carried a living man into the morgue. Greer set the clipboard on the gurney rail. If you want to argue, do it outside my patient's blood pressure. He reached anyway. Bad choice. Small, but complete. End quote. Greer kicked the gurney brake loose and drove the metal frame sideways into his path. The gurney carried its own ugly momentum, 4 wheels and steel tubing slamming low into thigh, hip, and pelvis. He hit the metal hard. The impact folded the man backward and punched the air out of him in one wet grunt. He grabbed for the rail. Greer stepped in close, used the gurney's weight and his own stagger, and pinned him against the yellow post hard enough to make his shoulders jump. The woman lunged for the wheel. Pike went low and blocked the gap, shoulders square, jaws closed, eyes fixed past her hand to the equipment. She flinched anyway. People always expected teeth. They never expected discipline. The third one came around, the oxygen rack. Greer saw the cylinder behind him, the valve, the dumb little chain holding bad physics in place. No gun, no wild strike. She slapped the fire door bar with her elbow and let the heavy door swing into his shoulder. Move left, now. Security finally did something useful and moved left. The whole fight lasted maybe 18 seconds, which was longer than it needed and shorter than anyone would admit later. The first man shoved off the post and ran for the van, limping now. The woman snatched at the clipboard, missed, and left it skidding under the gurney. The third man got his balance near the door, looked at Pike, looked at Greer, and decided there were easier ways to ruin his morning. They bailed into the rain. The van reversed too fast, rear tires hissing over wet concrete, rubber stuttering once before catching. Diesel smoke rolled back into the bay. Pike stayed planted until the taillights vanished past the service road. Only then did Greer crouch beside the track the van had left. Black tire water had smeared across the concrete, but not all of it washed clean. In the low groove near the dock lip, gray grit clung in damp grains, the same salt dark bite packed into the gurney wheel from the morgue. Gage went quiet on the phone. That was his version of swearing. Greer touched nothing. She looked from the wheel to the tire mark to the open rain beyond the dock. The hospital had not been the destination. It had been a stop. Jude Rafferty breathed like a machine was arguing with a ghost. Short pull in, long empty pause. Another pull, thinner than the last. The isolation bay felt too bright after the loading dock, too hot, too clean, like the hospital was trying to scrub the rain and diesel out of Greer's skin by force. It was failing. The smell of wet concrete had followed her in, along with Pike's quiet wait at the threshold, and Gage Cutler's uneven step behind her. Jude lay under warming blankets, with his lips cracked pale and his lashes stuck together in salt-spiked clumps. His pupils drifted when Greer lifted one lid, useless but not gone. Silva stood on the far side of the bed, one hand near the IV line, watching the monitor with the expression of a woman willing numbers to behave and fully aware numbers were stupid animals. Greer rubbed a knuckle against Jude's sternum, not hard enough to punish, hard enough to call him back. Jude, listen to my voice. His throat worked. Nothing. Greer leaned closer. Cold water. The boat. What color? The room held its breath, which was ridiculous because half the equipment in it existed to make noise. A pump clicked. Oxygen hissed. Somewhere beyond the glass, a cartwheel squealed and kept going. Jude's fingers twitched under the blanket, the right hand curling as if it still held rope. Greer caught the movement and touched his wrist. Color, she said again. Not a story, just color. His mouth opened. His tongue looked too dry for a man pulled out of water. Shock had a lousy sense of humor. Blue rope wasn't ours. The words scraped out unevenly, barely stitched together. Gage moved closer, stopping where the operating light hit his left eye and made the old clouding in it shine silver white. He did not interrupt. Smart man. Greer gave Jude one breath to fall back, then pressed the edge of the red strap near his palm, close enough for skin to feel it. This? Jude's face pinched. Recognition came through pain. Red litter, he whispered. The phrase made Gage's jaw set. Jude's pulse jumped on the monitor, ugly and fast. Silva looked at the numbers. 30 seconds, she said. Professional. No debate. No bedside courtroom nonsense. Praise be to every tired god of medicine. Greer nodded once and used the time. What did they want? Jude's eyes opened a little wider, and for a second he looked young. Not like a witness, like a man still in the water, staring at something above him that should have saved him and didn't. They wanted the bag. His breath hitched. The monitor complained. Silva adjusted the line with 2 quick movements. Gage had already picked up the sleeve pouch cut from Jude's soaked gear. He turned it under the light. The patch was half torn, stiff with salt, but the embroidered curve was still readable if you knew what to look for. Mercy. Wake. Medical evacuation vessel. Gage set it beside the red strap and the photo of the wheel grit on Greer's phone. No speech. Just a chain getting shorter. Blue rope, red litter, wrong hoist, he said. That's lift language. Gear language. Somebody built a lie out of rescue procedure. Greer looked at him. Careful. He gave a small, humorless nod. I'm being careful. That's the problem. Jude tried to move and failed. Greer steadied his shoulder before he spent the last of himself fighting blankets. Who? She asked. Wrong question. She knew it as soon as his eyes rolled, searching faces that were not in the room. Names were expensive. Sensory fragments were cheaper. She changed fast. Where do they go next? Jude's lips trembled. Silva's voice cut in, low and firm. Greer. Limit reached. Jude dragged in one shallow breath. They'll go for the boat. Then he dropped back, not unconscious exactly, just gone behind the cold again. Silva moved in and took the space without asking. Good. Greer stepped back. Gage had his phone out now, thumb moving through tide notes, vessel traffic, and whatever contractor channels a man like him pretended were not favors until they were. The harsh light caught his damaged eye again. Mercy Wake has a hoist window in under an hour, he said. Less, if weather shifts. Pike shifted at the door, silent, nose angled toward the hall that led back to the loading dock and beyond it the port. Greer looked at Jude, then at the red strap sealed in plastic, then at the gray grit photo still open on her screen. One living man had been delivered as a body. The next mistake was already on a clock. The port wind came at them like it had teeth. It shoved salt into Greer's mouth, scraped cold across her cheeks, and carried the rotten backwash of fish waste, diesel, wet rope, and hospital bleach over the service road behind Norfolk General. The bleach had followed her from the morgue into the trauma bay and out into the harbor air, a chemical ghost burning the back of her throat every time she swallowed. Pike worked low over the concrete, nose close enough to skim the shine off the rainwater. His nails ticked through shallow puddles, then went quiet when he crossed the van's first tire mark. Gage followed 10 steps back, with his hood up, his bad leg making every curb a negotiation. He did not complain. The limp did it for him. A short drag and catch that made his silhouette hitch under the sodium lights. Greer kept her light low. The black smear from the loading dock carried them past pallets, a closed gate, and a line of empty trash bins rocking in the wind. Here and there, gray grit clung in the tread print, the same salt-dark grains she had seen in the Gurney wheel. Small evidence. Enough. Enough was how people died and how they lived, depending who noticed. Pike snorted once and kept going. The hoist window sat in Greer's head like a second pulse. Under an hour. Less if weather shifts. Less if the people with the van were already moving faster than they were. The trail bent toward a wash station near the outer service lane, where a hose lay coiled under a light that flickered with the tired twitch of infrastructure nobody had funded properly. White runoff cut across the concrete in a wide, foamy stripe. Pike reached it and stopped so hard his shoulders bunched. His head lifted. Then the smell hit Greer too. Bleach, harsh and hot in the nose, layered over salt water and diesel until the whole strip of pavement felt chemically burned clean. Pike sneezed once. A second time. The third came rougher, dragging a rasp out of his chest. He backed half a step and shook his head. ears flattening, eyes bright with offended biology. The trail was gone. Not weakened. Gone. Wiped. Gage came up beside Greer, slower over the slick concrete, one hand briefly catching a chain-link post as his bad leg slipped. He looked at the pale wash line. "That's not cleanup." Greer crouched before Pike could try again and put 2 fingers against the front of his chest harness. "No." Pike looked at her hand, then at the ground, unhappy and still. Good dog. Stubborn dog. Not a machine. She checked his nose for blood, found none, and kept her hand there another second. Asking him to push through that chemical wall would have been easy. Easy was usually stupid, wearing a badge. Greer stood and let the wind slap the impatience off her face. The dog had failed. Fine. Failure told the truth, too, if you stopped whining long enough to read it. She looked past the wash station to the dark water beyond the fence, then back toward the service road, the dock edge, the tire marks, the angle of runoff. Jude had been tagged as cold water recovery, supposedly pulled from the harbor current and brought in clean by a rescue chain. But the grit in the Gurney wheel was not random harbor mud. It was compacted, gray, dragged in from dry staging, and then soaked, not scraped, from a natural recovery deck. The wash line sat between the hospital route and the container lanes, exactly where someone could erase scent before moving gear deeper into the yard. Greer pulled up the tide table Gage had sent and thumbed through the last hour, eyes stinging from the wind. Current was running wrong for the story they had been sold. A body dropped where the paperwork claimed should have drifted east with the pull, not shown up tied to that transfer path with industrial grit in the wheels. He didn't come from the water, where they said, she said. Gage looked toward the container stacks. They staged him. Greer hated how clean the answer felt. Clean answers usually meant dirty work had already been done. A dock worker's cart rattled somewhere beyond the fence, then stopped. A light swept once across the lane and moved on. Not police, not rescue, not cavalry. Just a port waking up ugly and early, full of people paid not to ask why bleach ran at 4 in the morning. Greer shifted them along the wash line instead of across it, following the edge where runoff thinned and the concrete gave back some of its smell. Pike moved with her, slower now, head angled away from the worst of the chemical bite. Gage stayed behind them, bad leg stiffening in the cold, breathing hard through his nose like pain was paperwork he had refused to sign. 30 yards down, Pike stopped beside a drain grate clogged with black leaves and plastic wrap. It was not a full alert. It was quieter and tighter, his body lowering, nose pointed under the grate. Curb where the wash had missed a dark little pocket. Greer crouched and saw it wedged behind the grate, a short length of blue rope, frayed at one end, stiff with salt and grit. The color cut through the dark like a bruise under skin. Gage exhaled behind her. Greer did not touch the rope with bare gloves. She took a photo first, then another, with the wash line in frame. Pike lifted his eyes toward the container yard beyond the fence, where reefer units hummed in the dark like a nest of mechanical insects. The blue rope pointed straight into them. The container yard swallowed sound and gave it back wrong. Reefer units buzzed from both sides of the lane, hundreds of steel boxes breathing cold into the dark, their motors whining like a hive that had learned electricity. Sodium lamps burned above the stacks and turned every puddle the color of old nicotine. Pike moved slower now, body low, nose working again after the chemical wash line had taken him apart and handed him back insulted. The blue rope fragment sat sealed in Greer's pocket, a small hard shape against her thigh. Gage kept to the shadow of a container wall, one hand on the rail for balance, his bad leg dragging just enough to remind everybody, including him, that he was not the point man. Greer was fine with that. Point men got seen first. She watched gaps, corners, reflected light, the way rainwater trembled in potholes when a truck engine idled somewhere too far off to be helpful. The air smelled of rust, fish oil, wet plastic, and that same faint bleach trying and failing to hide the harbor underneath. Between two refrigerated containers, the world narrowed into a wet steel throat. Pike stopped beside a stack of tarped equipment wedged in the gap. His shoulders locked. He sat hard, facing the pile. Greer did not rush the tarp. That was how eager people got their hands removed by surprises. She moved around the side, keeping the container wall close to her shoulder, and lifted one corner with the tip of a pry bar she had taken from a maintenance rack. Under the tarp sat a red litter, 2 rolls of tape, coiled line, and a bundle of straps laid out too neatly to be trash. Stage work. Storage had disorder. This had intent. Gage came in behind her and bent just far enough for the light to catch the old patch on the litter frame. Mercy Wake. Faded, cracked, peeled at the edge. Beside it, fresh tape wrapped a buckle in a color Greer had not seen on the hospital gear. New tape on old label. New lie on old trust. Gage's left eye clouded silver under the lamp. The label's old. The danger isn't. A scrape sounded behind them. Metal on concrete. Quick and close. Greer dropped the tarp and turned. 2 men came out of the container gap at the same time, close enough that distance stopped being a plan and became a punchline. One had a short pry tool. The other had both hands empty, which meant he thought his size was enough. Adorable, in the way falling bricks were adorable. The first man swung too high. Greer stepped inside the arc and drove her shoulder into his chest, all weight and angle, no choreography. His back hit the container with a flat boom that rang through the lane. The second came from the right. Pike moved to block him, fast despite the long night, but the ground under the tarp was littered with metal scraps hidden in the rainwater. His front paw came down on a jagged shard. Greer heard the sound before she saw the blood, a sharp scrape of claw on metal, then a short, hurt whine that Pike tried to swallow and failed. His nails skittered against the concrete as he fought to hold position. Blood appeared on the concrete, mixing with the rain. Greer's whole body wanted to turn toward him. She did not. Not yet. The second man reached for the staged litter. Greer grabbed a loose coil of rope from the pile and snapped it low across his shins. He stumbled, and she shoved him into the narrow gap between containers, hard enough to bang his elbow against steel. Pike held the line, injured paw trembling, claws scraping once more as he braced. Gage kicked the dropped pry tool under the tarp, out of reach. "I can make it safer. I can't make it wholly." His voice stayed dry, which was either courage or damage. Usually, both. The men broke when they realized they had not found confused hospital staff in the dark. One ran limping between the containers. The other followed, clutching his elbow and swearing in short, practical bursts. No speeches, no threats, no grand villain nonsense. Good. The yard already had enough noise. Greer let them go 3 steps before choosing Pike over pursuit. She crouched fast, caught his injured paw, and saw the trauma open under the pad. No melodrama, just injury, grit, blood, and a dog still trying to get back to work because loyalty had terrible judgment. Pike trembled once and pulled toward the staged gear. "Don't," she said, softer than an order and colder than comfort. Gage took photos of the red litter, the wrong tape, the old Mercy Wake label, the blue line tucked beneath the frame. His phone rang before he finished. Silva's name lit the screen. Greer answered on speaker while wrapping gauze from her pocket kit around Pike's paw, tight enough to slow bleeding, not enough to numb. Silva's voice came clipped and strained. Jude's condition deteriorated. "We got him back." He woke for maybe 20 seconds. In the background, Jude's voice drifted thin and broken through hospital noise. "Second lift. Don't let them lift." The line crackled. Gage looked at his watch. 38 minutes, he said. Pike set the bandaged paw down, flinched, and still faced the dark lane toward the water. Dawn had not opened yet. It just bruised the water gray and let the wind do the rest. The little support boat climbed one wave, dropped off the back of it, and punched the next with a flat metal slam that traveled through Greer's knees, hips, ribs, and teeth. The hull rang every time it hit, a blunt aluminum wham swallowed by engine growl and broken water. Pike stood braced between her legs and the low rail, bandaged front paw lifting half an inch whenever the deck kicked too hard. The engine growled under them, not loud enough to be a helicopter, Not close, but close enough in the body. Pike knew that kind of vibration. Greer felt it through the harness before she saw it in him, a tremor moving through the straps and into her palm. His shoulders shook with it, memory with teeth. Greer kept one hand on his harness and the other on the rail, not petting him, not making a lie out of comfort. Work if you can. Rest if you can't. He leaned into the pressure but kept facing forward. Stubborn dog. Fine. And she understood stubborn. Spray hit her cheek hard enough to sting, and somewhere ahead, past the chop and the dirty horizon, Mercy Wake sat in the gray with her deck lights wrong for that hour. Gage hunched near the small console, one knee locked to manage his bad leg, one hand wrapped around the radio microphone. He looked miserable in a practical way. I hate boats. They're buildings that know how to drown you. He said it without drama, like a man stating the weather. The boatman, a hospital transport contractor who had already regretted 3 life choices, kept them low and angled behind a line of anchored service barges. No siren. No running lights beyond what would keep them from being crushed by a bigger idiot in the dark. The engine thudded, coughed, caught again, and the deck kicked up hard enough to make Gage grab the console with his free hand. Greer watched the shape of Mercy Wake appear between sheets of spray. Not dead, not normal either. Too still at the stern, too many lights around the hoist deck. A vessel under stress had posture, same as a body. It held itself wrong. Gage thumbed the microphone. Static cracked cold through the speaker. Mercy Wake, this is Harbor Medical Support. Request status on transfer window. He kept his voice bored, official enough to pass, not urgent enough to spook whoever might be listening with a weapon and a bad plan. The reply did not come fast. That was the first answer. Not silence. Worse. A pause with thought behind it. Greer saw Gage's thumb tighten before the speaker made a sharp, electric sound. A man answered with the correct format, the right vessel name, the right transfer phrase, and a delay that sat half a beat too long before each clean piece. Like someone was reading from a card and waiting for permission between lines, static scratched through the vowels. Behind it, faint and thin, came a metallic clank that did not belong to radio noise. Gage did not look at Greer. Good. Looking would have told the universe they had noticed. He asked one more routine question, something about patient readiness and wind, and the same wrong rhythm came back. Correct words. Wrong breath. Pike trembled harder when the engine dipped, bandaged paw touching down, lifting again, his body sending small vibrations up through Greer's grip. She felt the decision arrive without ceremony. A broad alert would light up every radio, every uniform, every protocol. If the wrong people had a hand on the hoist, noise would make them pull early. Hero calls, dead hostages. Humanity's favorite administrative shortcut. Gage cut transmission and lowered the microphone. For 3 seconds there was only engine, hull slap, wind, Pike's harsh breathing, and the dull thud of Greer's pulse under her jaw. "They're being walked through it," he said. "Somebody's close enough to make them answer." From Mercy Wake came a thin, warning tone, carried over water in pieces, then swallowed by the wind. Hoist, alarm. The sound did something ugly to Pike. He pressed forward so fast, Greer had to catch the harness and feel the shake in him transfer up her arm. Blood had darkened the edge of the white wrap around his paw. Not much. Enough. Always enough. The boatman looked back. "You want me to call it in?" Greer looked at the deck lights, the shroud stern, the service crane that gave them a blind seam along the port side. "No, broad call." Gage nodded once, already pointing. "There. Dead angle under the stern light." Mercy Wake answered again, over the radio. This time, not to them, not really. Patient ready for lift. Greer tasted salt and old fear, then tightened her grip on Pike. The next mistake had started moving. The deck of Mercy Wake was wet enough to shine and loud enough to erase thought. The helicopter hung above the hoist zone like a steel insect, rotor wash hammering straight down, flattening rain, tearing spray off the rail, and beating loose straps across the deck. Greer came over the stern edge low, one hand on the slick ladder, one hand closing on Pike's harness before his injured paw hit wrong. Gage climbed after her with a grim little grunt, his bad leg slipping once before he caught the rail. Nobody had time to make that noble. The hoist alarm wailed overhead. The deck center belonged to the lift zone, a red litter, already rigged, too clean in some places and too wrong in others. Blue rope ran taut where it should have had slack, frayed fibers standing out under strain. On the port side, near the rail, a man screamed from under a blanket, loud enough to be heard even through the wind. On the starboard side, closer to the bulkhead and half under a tarp, another body lay quiet and almost still. A crewman near the hoist controls kept his hands visible and his face empty with terror. Naturally, everyone had been looking at the loud one. People loved noise. It made decisions feel easier. A man in a weather jacket grabbed the litter frame and shouted, "Clear the lift!" No evil grin, no speech, just logistics, with a knife behind it. Greer moved through the rotor wash with her shoulders down, counting position instead of fear. Helicopter above, hoist center, weather jacket at the red litter, screaming decoy on the port rail. Quiet, patient starboard, closer to Greer, rain collecting in the hollow of his throat. The deck tilted under her and tried to throw her into the lift zone. She caught the rail, slid, recovered. Pike stayed with her, limping, eyes past the men and on the rigging. Somewhere in Greer's head, Jude's broken hospital whisper returned, thin as static. Dog alerted to the line, not the men. He had gotten the dog wrong. The line was the point. Greer dropped beside the quiet patient and put 2 fingers at the carotid. Weak, fast, bad. The screaming man clawed at her sleeve from the edge of the zone. "Help me first!" Greer peeled his hand off without looking at his face. "The loud one still has air. Give me the quiet one." The deck froze around the command for 1 clean second. Medical reality had outranked theater. The terrified crewman moved toward Greer. The man in the weather jacket did not. He went for the hoist release instead. Pike launched before Greer could stop him, not biting, not attacking, just cutting across the wet center line and dropping into a hard freeze beside the blue rope where it fed into the strap assembly under the red litter. His bandaged paw hit the deck. The wrap went red almost at once. He made one small sound, swallowed it, and held position with his nose fixed on the wrong strap. Greer saw the blood spread into rainwater and felt something in her go clean and cold. "Stop the lift!" she shouted. The rotor tore half the words away, so she shouted again, lower, harder. One hand raised flat in the universal language of, "Do not kill my patient." Gage tracked the geometry through the chaos. Blue lines stretched from the rail cleat, under the red litter frame, into the wrong strap point, where the old Mercy Wake label tag whipped beneath the lift hardware. "Don't lift with that strap." He drove himself toward the rigging, while the weather jacket man shoved off the rail and tried to block him. Gage did not explain. Explaining would have been obscene. The fight broke open in ugly little pieces. The weather jacket man grabbed Gage's arm. Greer shoved the quiet patient's airway open with one hand and kicked a loose deck chalk into the man's shin with the other. He staggered into the litter frame. The red litter slid, the blue rope snapped tight, and the helicopter above rose half a foot, enough to make the whole setup scream under load. Gage got his blade under the blue line at the exposed tension point, braced his bad leg against the deck lip, and cut once, hard. The rope parted with a wet crack and whipped across the deck, vanishing into spray. The hoist crewman killed the lift. The red litter dropped back with a brutal clang that shook water off the frame. Pike flinched, but did not leave the strap until Greer gave the hand sign. Then he limped toward her, blood marking each step, because apparently loyalty had terrible judgment. Greer pulled the quiet patient clear of the lift zone and pressed down over the wound she had found under the tarp. The screaming man had stopped screaming. He was watching the severed blue rope now, face pale, caught by the rescue process he had tried to use. Gage pinned him against the rail with his forearm, and no heroics at all. The first wrong hoist was dead. The deck was not safe, not even close. The second wrong thing turned out to be under the red litter frame, because apparently one murder trap had not been enough for the morning. Greer saw it when the quiet patient coughed blood onto her glove and the litter shifted with the deck. A narrow strap, newer than the others, ran where no clean lift line needed to run. Not a lecture, not a blueprint, just enough wrong geometry to kill somebody if the deck crew trusted it. Gage saw her look and went still. The man he had pinned tried to wrench free, but Gage drove him back into the rail with the tired irritation of a man who had already spent all his charm on not drowning. Greer kept pressure on the quiet patient and pointed with 2 fingers. Gage cut the secondary strap short and ugly. The hoist crewman dragged the red litter clear. The helicopter climbed off, rotor wash fading from punishment to noise. 2 of the logistics men escaped into the lower passage while the crew tackled the weather jacket man. Greer let them go. Chasing them would not restart a pulse. Pike stood beside her with rainwater and blood running off his bandage, still facing the dead strap like he did not trust it to stay dead. The clean lift, when it finally happened, looked nothing like a movie. It looked slow, wet, and humiliatingly careful. The quiet patient was secured into corrected gear with hands that shook and still did the job. Greer checked airway, chest rise, bleeding, pupils, skin temperature, every small, ugly fact that mattered more than rage. Gage photographed the cut strap, the old Mercy Wake label, the severed blue rope, the red litter, Pike's bloody paw print beside the wrong line, evidence chain, his favorite miserable little religion. The screaming decoy sat handcuffed to a deck cleat by a crewman who looked ready to vomit on him. Good. Vomit was honest. The quiet patient lifted clean this time, swinging under the helicopter in a controlled arc, not graceful, not safe, just survivable. Greer did not breathe until the litter cleared the rail and kept rising. Only then did her own hands start to shake, so she used them for something useful. She cut the soaked wrap from Pike's paw. The pad was torn wider now, showing the severity of the trauma, and white fibers from the gauze dragged into the injury. Pike tried to pull away toward the deck. Greer caught his leg. "You're done." By the time they reached Norfolk again, daylight had become a thin, gray accusation over the hospital windows. Jude Rafferty was alive, which sounded better than it looked. He had a ventilator doing part of the work, warming lines running, bruises blooming under waxy skin, and Silva standing over him with the grim expression of someone guarding a candle in a wind tunnel. She did not ask whether Greer had enjoyed her unauthorized maritime field trip, another reason to respect her. Gage handed over a sealed evidence pouch to 2 men who did not give names and did not need to. Hospital risk management appeared 5 minutes later with clean shoes, flat eyes, and a folder already thick enough to prove humanity had invented paper to punish oxygen. Sealed review, they called it. Internal containment, temporary restriction of access. Each term landed colder than the last. Then came the phrase that made Gage's mouth twitch without humor. Compartmentalized call list. Greer listened without blinking. They were not thanking her. They were not arresting her either. Bureaucracy, the world's least satisfying middle finger, had chosen to keep her close because the next mistake might need someone who knew where to look. Near the loading dock, Pike lay on a folded blanket under the sour yellow morning light, while Greer flushed the wound with saline and packed fresh gauze between the torn edges of the paw pad. Stains appeared on the white gauze. He watched her hands, not the room, amber eyes dull with pain and stubborn enough to make her angry. That was safer than soft. Soft would have wrecked her. Gage stood nearby, with one shoulder against the wall, phone buzzing in his hand, not answering it yet. Somewhere down the corridor, Jude's monitor kept making its thin, borrowed music. Alive, not whole. Alive. Outside, a refrigerated truck backed toward the bay with a dull hydraulic whine. Greer looked up before she knew why. Pike lifted his head too, ears uneven, body exhausted, but listening. The rear doors opened. Cold air spilled out, white in the morning. A new black body bag slid forward on a clean gurney, glossy as fresh ink. Then the zipper moved, just a short test pull, and the sound cut through the loading dock with the same dry, icy rasp that had started everything. Routine had learned nothing. Greer's hand stayed on Pike's bandage until the bleeding slowed.